God's people periodically embark on epic wilderness treks to a promised land. The Book of Mormon begins this way with one of history's most powerful and faith-promoting journeys, as Lehi's family crosses arid, expansive, and forbidding terrain over an 8-year period. Having lived in the Arabian Peninsula for a number of years, we can attest to generally bleak conditions interspersed with rare sightings of green fertility. The joy of such refreshing discoveries is magnified by the hardship of finding them. We offer a few personal photos to compare with Nephi's descriptions of the trek. The Book of Mormon is built on foundations set in 1 Nephi: visions, angels, brass plates, the tree of life, the Liahona, many trials of faith, a beautiful place to build a ship, and family attitudes that define the troubled history of Lamanites and Nephites. While we do not know exact locations for events, Nephi gives us clues as he records the Lord's blessings to his family in the desert. We find everything his record requires: water, hunting, mountains, and a bountiful seashore in otherwise dry landscape. Our goal is not to make doctrinal nor academic conclusions, but to share testimony of the Lord's hand in preparing these lands through which Lehi's caravan would travel. So, on to Arabia, a place much bigger than Texas. These statements from Nephi help us determine a general direction. Let's quickly look at them in order. They leave Jerusalem, going down in elevation and southward to the top of the Red Sea, whose borders likely refer to mountains that form barriers to travel. This is where a 3-day journey begins. 1 Nephi 2:5 notes borders near and nearer the Red Sea, which makes perfect sense when one sees that these mountains shift from being nearby to being right on the shoreline. Assuming a caravan advancing roughly 25 miles per day, we would look for a valley of Lemuel and river Laman about 75 miles down the coast. Here they camp for a significant period of time. When they hit the road again, with the help of the Liahona, they cross the river on a 4-day journey to the south-southeast. They call the next encampment Shazar. Proceeding in a similar direction, they are led to areas of sufficient fertility to replenish supplies and keep their strength up. Nephi suggests a series of campsites appropriate to rest and recuperation, leading towards mountains where Nephi's bow breaks. Grief hits the party after another long stretch and the death of Ishmael. One might assume they spent some time to grieve in this place which was called Nahom. Note the passive tense, as if the name Nahom already existed. For all of the other campsites, Nephi stated that Lehi or his party named them. They traveled nearly eastward from this time forth. Nephi's record highlights much affliction as the trek nears its destination, which, by contrast, is so lovely they call it Bountiful. Nephi states that all these things were prepared of the Lord. As the journey alternates between hardship and reward, these simple arrows only identify a general direction, when in fact the family must have wandered extensively. Do the Lord's wilderness tests ever take a straight line to a promised land? In 5 places, Nephi specifically says they pitched their tents. These are likely heavy Bedouin tents, and we assume they had camels for their much cargo. Matching the general descriptions, we might look for these 5 locations roughly as noted. Let's see a few photographs of the terrain. The Red Sea extends into the Gulf of Aqaba, near which a caravan might cover about 75 miles in 3 days. Part of the journey looks rather flat for traveling. They might make good progress here. Did your sharp eyes find the camel? The upper view faces inward from the sea. Note the broad coastal plain with mountains near. Soon enough, those mountains will crowd right into the water. The lower photo looks across the Gulf to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Perhaps the final of this 3 days' journey was in barriers nearer the Red Sea, as one could not travel along the coast any further without this modern highway. Here the caravan would need to travel in dry riverbeds some distance inland. I find peace in these mountains and gravel highways. We are near ancient Midian, where Moses learned of his prophetic mission. Nephi may have been schooled in his mission in these very mountains as well. This particular shot looks eastward, away from the Red Sea, in what maps now call the Valley of the Goodly Name, in Arabic Wadi Tayyib al-Ism. Turning now westward, we face mountains that hide our view of the Gulf of Aqaba. Let's continue in that direction. The valley has ample grazing to support a herd of camels. Remember those heavy tents that suggest camels for this journey. About 3 miles from the sea, the valley narrows into a dramatic canyon with high walls on both sides. If I were Lehi, I might even find them firm and steadfast and immovable, admonishing Lemuel to aspire to similar qualities. Inside that canyon is a truly rare find in the Arabian desert, flowing water. We have found the water flowing in each of our trips to the valley at different seasons of the year. Other visitors verify the same. This is the only such flow of water we have seen in this corner of Arabia, although the large valleys also suggest periodic runoff when flash floods hit the region. Moving down the canyon towards the sea, we find spots of lush vegetation, rocky outcrops, and that beautiful stream. Birds chirp happily and dates adorn the palm trees. A quick overhead view shows the canyon's winding path. Nephi's curious remark that when my father saw that the waters of the river emptied into the fountain of the Red Sea suggests the river's destination was not immediately clear, which makes sense if this winding canyon stood between their camp and the seashore. If one does explore the mouth of the canyon, this dramatic opening appears. These impressive cliffs butt up against the Red Sea. Conditions here seem to fit Nephi's description of a place from which he and his brothers returned to Jerusalem twice, and in which Lehi built an altar to thank the Lord. Lehi had dreams and Nephi had visions. Lehi studied the brass plates and taught his family, and a number of marriages took place. After such an eventful period, it was time to venture into the dry landscape beyond this accommodating valley. We met a hunter in these mountains looking for gazelle. In former times, the beautiful white oryx also provided good hunting. The Liahona helped set a 4-day course deeper into Arabia. Some have tried to determine likely routes and campsites, which may have overlapped with the frankincense trail for parts of the journey. It is useful to consider the need for rest stops, hunting, and water along the way. Without trying to pin a precise location for Shazar, my photos simply verify that there are indeed more fertile parts, and even most fertile parts, in this desert waste to which the Liahona might guide us. In a region that looks much like this, and is peppered with expanses of rock and sand, imagine the thrill of finding a little greenery. One could learn to appreciate God's blessings, obedience, and the Liahona. This is another rare flow of water many miles distant from the coast that flows out of the rock. People fill water jugs from the mountain spring. Large date groves share this valley with mangoes and citrus, a truly surprising find after many hours of bone-dry driving. At least we were in air-conditioned comfort. Imagine the blessing of such places on an otherwise endless wilderness trek. A few more hours southeast by car is another area of rich date groves near Al-Ula. These are not the only green spots in modern Arabia, yet they are particularly large and generally fed by groundwater. A date grove is a shady escape from desert fatigue. This photo was taken another few hours southeast, in what was once the Jewish settlement of Khaybar. We rounded a curve in dry landscape and were treated to a sudden fertile display. Desert treks can be punctuated by pleasant rest stops if one has proper guidance. Further southeast is Medina, now the second holiest city in Islam, which is known for wonderful dates. Such fertile stepping stones could enable many days' journey towards higher mountain ranges beyond Mecca. Those higher elevations may be where Nephi's bow breaks, and in that region researchers have identified potential sources of wood flexible enough for Nephi to make a new bow. In mountains that take your mind off the desert for a while, with green pastures and old rock watchtowers. Such rugged areas are not easy to travel through, so Lehi's little band may have stayed in the desert fringes as they skirted the rougher terrain. For hunting, Nephi mentions going up into the top of the mountain, as directed by the Liahona. Modern agriculture at high altitude suggests fertility and good hunting grounds for a starving family in the flatlands below, still only about midway through their desert adventure. Soon enough, the landscape reverts back to the hardship of dry desert. As we get closer to the border with Yemen, many areas are so barren that mud brick is the only viable building material. The journey must have been a roller coaster with hardship and hunger the norm. I have no photos of what might be Nahom due to the ongoing war in Yemen. However, a number of smart minds previously explored the area. On YouTube, you can find Journey of Faith to see how Nahom fits Nephi's history. This is where the family grieves Ishmael's death. After Nahom, what's left of our wilderness survival course? An eastward advance to the shore of many waters. This may have been the toughest part of the journey, rugged dryness before a blessed discovery that the Lord had prepared a place for shipbuilding. We finally emerge from desolation to Bountiful. Conditions in Nephi's description require seashore, where they pitched tents, and mountains for prayer, among other things. We should find much fruit and wild honey. Shipbuilding materials are also required, although we do not know exactly what sort of ship Nephi constructed, as it was not after the manner of most man-made ships of the day. Nephi does seek ore to make tools. These requirements are met in this exotic coastline, a place of bounty at the end of an 8-year challenge. This photo was taken in the rainy season with mist and deep greenery looking galaxies away from the desert. Arabs from drier places love to vacation here when the rains fall. The local museum models the topography, indicating how mountains catch monsoon rains to create a green coastal oasis, with very dry landscape just beyond to the north. The region does have multiple seasons. If Lehi arrived in the wet season, it's hard to imagine his surprise, but even in drier times we see more vegetation and grazing cattle than one finds elsewhere. Whether shockingly bountiful or just mildly bountiful on their arrival day, an extreme blessing followed the wilderness crossing. Here is another dry season, wet season comparison taken in the same spot. Even the dry season offers more hope of survival than the desert we came through. And did not Nephi's brothers threaten to throw him in the depths of the sea? That's not very logical from a sandy beach, but a rocky crag makes it more than feasible. Beach and cliffs alternate along the Dhofar coast. Near the port of Salalah, this flow of water caught me off guard in the driest season of the year, a month before new rains would replenish the groundwater. This waterfall was also refreshing. As seasoned desert travelers, we found this extremely bountiful. Imagine swimming in an Arabian waterhole. This shot was taken in the dry part of the year. The scene is doubly glorious when rains create endless fountains. And much fruit. The coastal zone supports ample year-round agriculture, fruit, wild honey, and herds of livestock. For a quick reality check, we went behind the mountains to the inland desert. Indeed, all that green of the wet season thrives on the seaward side of the mountains, hidden in the clouds beyond this dry frankincense plantation, a short drive into the interior. The fertile zone is only along the coast, stretching both directions from the modern city of Salalah. Let's view a couple of spots where one might conceive of building a ship. Both have been suggested in books we will list at the end. This bay is well fed by fresh water from the interior, which might be the source of this driftwood. The bay is a known shipbuilding port of ancient date. Old cities are a marvel, as are the more isolated spots along this fascinating coast where the Liahona might lead. The port we just saw was about where the right arrow points, while a more remote site for a potential shipbuilding family has been suggested some distance to the west. In that zone, equally impressive in its bountiful endowment, mountains hide the various inlets where one might rest for a long wilderness crossing, then jump to work on a ship for the next leg of their faithful journey. Notice how this river valley angles its way to the seashore, the type of terrain Lehi's party could use to get from the dusty interior to the humid shoreline. We end with a reminder of the general bounty that makes this coast a potential match for Nephi's narrative. Land unexplored by Western eyes when the Book of Mormon was published fits perfectly with Nephi's journal. He describes many hardships, but also a land prepared of the Lord. Arabia can both test and bless God's children. Don't just take my word for it. This camel can also testify, this is a bountiful land. And this shot was in the dry season. One finds, in fact, more camels on the highways of Dhofar than most places in Arabia, whose forbidding geography has valleys, more fertile parts, and a bountiful land right where Nephi says they should be. I hope you enjoyed this journey. These photos represent a valuable personal adventure, yet I take no credit for discovering these beautiful places. For further background reading, you may wish to look into these fascinating sources by Hugh Nibley, George Potter and Richard Wellington, and Warren Aston. Also, as noted earlier, the video Journey of Faith offers a sense of Nahum as well as the entire journey we've discussed here. Lehi's wilderness travels offer a useful example for our own journey through life as we seek the advantages of God's blessings by following His direction. The trek continues.